Hey everybody, OperationZ here, and I have this message today on the story of Abraham, part 2, continuing where we left off from last time in part 1. So Genesis 12:7 says this, "And the Lord appeared unto Abram, and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land, and there builded he an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him." So God comes to him and gives him this promise, as we see before when they leave the land of Haran, him and Lot and Sarai his wife and all the servants and everyone that was with them and his herds and all that he had there. And we see here that God appears to him again and promises him to his descendants he will give him that land, to possess that land and have it and to be a nation. So there he built an altar unto the Lord. He builded an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him. So he builds this altar unto the Lord because God appeared to him there. And we see that basically he worships God as his own God. From that point where he's called and chooses to obey the voice of the Most High God and the Lord of hosts, and he does what God's will for him was to do. So Abram was in obedience to God, and he becomes a worshiper of the Most High God. So he built that altar there. Genesis 12:8, "And he removed from thence unto a mountain on the east of Bethel, and pitched his tent, having Bethel on the west, and Hai on the east. And there he built an altar unto the Lord, who appeared unto him." So we see that he's there and he built an altar unto the Lord who appeared unto him. He worships there. And see, in the days of old, before the flood happened and after the flood, people called on the name of the Lord, and people worshiped the Most High God and knew God as God. But I'm not sure if people in these days knew who God was, because they made so many other gods and there were other gods that they worship. But later on, as Abraham's story goes on and the story of the descendants of Abraham goes on, God in his glory is spread forth throughout that whole region and that whole area and all throughout the world that it would be spread to. Maybe not throughout the whole world, but throughout the area, all the nations round about see the things that God does and has done. And, it's very noteworthy with all these things and miracles and signs that God does, that his fame and glory goes about throughout everywhere. And it all starts here in the Genesis with Abraham. Right here, Abram, but he becomes Abraham, father of many nations. That it all starts with one person. And it's just amazing to see what all God has done, starting out with just one person, with Abram and with Sarai. That, we see all these things that take place and many miracles that happen through the descendants of Abram. So Genesis 12:9, "And Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south." So Abram journeys a lot with his family with him and with all the servants and his herds that he had possession of. Just keeping in mind he was a prince. He was known as a prince in those days when he was in Haran. He was still wealthy, and his name means father of greatness, that name Abram, before it becomes the name change that God himself gives Abram, becoming Abraham, father of many nations. So they journey and they leave Haran and they travel around a bit, as it says here in 12:9. Genesis 12:10, and there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. So there was a famine in the land, and a famine is very harsh, very grievous to the people that have to endure it in those conditions and in that climate. That basically, with that environment that he's in, if there's a famine, it's very hard on not only the people but also the herds and the flocks, that they don't thrive because they can't get the food that they need, and they tend to lack the hydration that they need because of all these harsh conditions, and they die of starvation and thirst, and they don't always get through what they're going through. So Abram's going through this with his nephew Lot and with his family and his servants and all his cattle and his herds that he has. They're enduring through these tough and difficult conditions. So they decide to go into the land of Egypt to sojourn there, and there ends up being an issue that goes on there when they do go there. And we'll see what that is here coming up. So Genesis 12:11, and it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold now, I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. So we see here that Sarai, Abram's worried because Sarai is a very beautiful woman and she's fair to look upon and to see, and he's worried that something's going to happen here. Genesis 12:12, Therefore it shall come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they shall say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but they will save thee alive. So this is going on here, and he's worried about this and what will happen with this section right here. With not this section right here, but in this part right here, they're worried about that happening. So he says here, Genesis 12:13, Say, I pray thee, thou art my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and my soul shall live because of thee. So they get this idea to say that, basically, that it's his sister, and to get through the land, that because it was something that Abram was worried about. And they go about doing that, and long story short, to summarize what happens, she's brought to Pharaoh because Pharaoh seeks her to be his wife, and God plagues Pharaoh for trying to take Sarai away from Abram, but he didn't know that it was his wife because he said it was his sister. And where that happens, God plagues Pharaoh and entreats Abram with a lot of cattle and flocks, which these were given basically for Sarai because he said it was his sister, and he was already entreated with these flocks and with these herds. So massive wealth. Flocks and herds are as wealth. With, in these times, it's as literally living wealth. That the cattle are very valuable. The flocks and the herds, the everything that they could have, it's very valuable, and it's what to seek after. But he also receives a lot of silver and gold as well from Pharaoh. So Pharaoh sends Abram and his family away, and his servants and all the cattle and everything. They go with Abram, that he has a great abundance as he leaves here. And I'll just kind of summarize that part of the text that happens next. And, we go through this area right here that basically, we see all these things that take place, the famine, and we see the the worship, because he builds the altar and he calls upon the name of the Lord. So, and there might have been a big time period before anyone was worshiping the Lord, and God chooses Abram to be a people for him, and God chooses him to be a nation, a peculiar nation of priests and a priesthood that worships and loves God, and just his people that he sought to be his people. So that's the message for today, and you all have a blessed day.